Bioethics for Thursday. That's May 7th, I think. So we're going to finish talking about aliens today. Next week we'll wrap up the semester as well as we can online. But remember to turn in your service hours if you haven't. If you haven't, holy cow, you've got like 2 emails by now. Turn them in. Turn in your like 300-word paper. It takes like 5 minutes. Holy cow, turn in your service hours. You want to graduate, don't you? I want you to graduate. Graduate. Turn in your service hours. Graduate. Okay. Bioethics of aliens. Duty towards extraterrestrial life. I think the critical question about extraterrestrial life is humanness. All right. Intelligent life, sort of reasonable, logical life, right? The ability to use logic and reason sort of separates us from the animals, and so that sort of life has the most ethical implications. So basically, if aliens are human, in the sense they're made in the image and likeness of God, meaning if they're human and that they have the ability to love, to create, to have free will, to truly choose good, to use logic, to use reason, then any ethics about people apply to these aliens. That's the short and simple answer. Killing them is murder. Stealing from them is theft. Right? Bioethics even. Right? Like we would have a duty to provide medical care as best we can. Those sort of things. They'd be people, if not humans, but people. And so we'd have the same sort of bioethical and ethical duties towards them as we would towards any human person, which is weird, right? And I think for some, a difficult thing. There are some who would say whatever we find in space we can just take. It's sort of like natural human instinct, like, we go out into space, we find a planet full of gold and diamonds and iron and uranium, and we're like, great, we're going to take it. Oh, there's some intelligent life, but they're only like medieval era compared to us. Like, well, we're just going to take it anyways. There are some who would say that, but I mean, they're basically people, and you're basically stealing. It's the same thing. It's like stealing resources from a remote village in Africa or Brazil or something, right? I mean, it's the same thing. Because there are people who steal resources from remote tribes in South America. Those same people would probably steal resources from people on Jupiter, which there's some people on Jupiter, but you get what I'm saying. Right? If you have no problem stealing people's like hunting grounds to chop down to raise cattle for McDonald's, you'll have no problem stealing people's like relics and statues to melt down for minerals, So that's a thing we have to keep in mind with space exploration. We're going to look at two sort of like case studies in actual space bioethics that we did, which is kind of fun because NASA's kind of got like a xenobioethics like department. They don't have a department, but they have like people who ask these questions and answer these questions. So there was a satellite Cassini, which we sent to Saturn. Right, you take a lot of pictures of Saturn, document all sorts of information about temperature and atmosphere and the rings and all sorts of things about Saturn. All right, Cassini. Well, Cassini gathered the information we wanted it to gather. Great. So NASA could have done two things. They could have left it in orbit to get even more information, just basically at that point free extra info, or crash Cassini somewhere. NASA, now, okay, you hear those two things. Like, do you want free extra science space information, or do you want to crash an expensive satellite? You're like, clearly the extra free science space information. But no, NASA crashed Cassini into Saturn. Why? It was a functioning satellite around Saturn. Why did they just wreck it? You're like, oh, well, my car got me to work today, so should I park it here or should I blow it up? I'm going to blow it up. Like, what? No, that doesn't make any sense, but maybe it does. Even though the machine costs millions of dollars and still function, I want you to answer this question to yourself, and then I'm going to tell you, like, think about this for half a second. Did we have a duty to destroy our satellite? I mean, all things point to no, except Saturn has a moon. It has a couple moons, but it has a moon named Europa. What's special about Europa, ye science aficionados? Well, you probably know it's made of ice. There's a lot of ice. Liquid water under the ice and then solid water in the form of ice. There's water on the moon, a lot of water. It's also in our solar system. It's far away from the sun. It's very cold, that's why there's a lot of ice. But there's water. And we have certain bacteria and other organisms that survive in very cold water, even in ice, right? If we didn't, you just put food in the freezer and it'd sterilize it, right? But that's not how it works. We have like tardigrades, little bacteria, water bear things that can survive for long periods of time in ice. So this is so crazy to think that perhaps Europa could have some kind of, maybe even just bacteria that are alive, that developed independently of Earth. Could they have some kind of viruses, or could they have some kind of small animals, or planktons, or fungi, or whatever? I mean, single-celled, multicellular organisms, could it be there? There's liquid water, and it's in our solar system. Yeah, it could be. What are the odds? Pretty low. So what did NASA do? What are the odds of the satellite crashing into Europa instead of Saturn naturally in a decaying orbit? Well, pretty low. It's probably going to hit Saturn and not a moon. What are the odds that Europa has life? Pretty low. It's so cold, it's pretty likely there's no life, even though there's water. What does a satellite cost? Millions of dollars, right? So pretty low odds it actually hits it, pretty low odds there's life there, and it costs $1 million. But we crashed it anyways. Because NASA decided we had a duty to destroy our satellite so that it couldn't accidentally crash into Europa and maybe kill alien life. That's a real-life bioethical decision about aliens somebody made. Would you have made the same decision? That's a question. There could be life. All right. There's even an oxygen atmosphere. Failed to mention that. Like, there could literally be life. But there's also a second problem about space junk. All right. Take a look at this Nature article, right? But what's our bioethical obligation about space junk? So you may or may not know, right? When you shoot a satellite up into space, it usually stays there, right? And we shoot a lot of crap into space. We shoot a lot of crap into space. America shoots a lot of crap. Russia, China, all sorts of people. Like, there's thousands upon thousands of satellites and satellite parts and debris from space missions all over Earth in space. And satellites don't last forever, right? So if you send a satellite up and it has solar panels, or it has a nuclear reactor, it has whatever, it might operate for 10, 20, 200 years, but then it'll stop working. And then it will sit there. The issue is they're moving at like 15,000 miles per hour. You go up there in a space shuttle, there are tiles on space shuttles that have returned back to Earth that have what look to be basically bullet holes in them from flecks of paint floating around space that just punch into a space shuttle because it's going 15,000 miles an hour. You should have fleck of paint at your car at 15,000 miles per hour. You better believe it's going through your car, right? So do we have a sort of ethical duty about space junk? Right, well, would you leave a huge crap heap of scrap metal all over town? No, right? Like, would it be ethical to take the 4,000 or 5,000 satellite bodies and just drop them on Des Moines and let them be there? No. Why? Yeah, people are going to hurt themselves. You're going to block the roads. It's dangerous. It's polluting because of the fuel sources and the scientific instruments. You might have radiation all over the place. It'd be awful. It'd be very unethical, especially to people, right, to just drop all this trash on Des Moines. But we do it around Earth in space. Is it different? Right? We have landfills, right, around Des Moines where you take all the garbage, you put it there, and it decays over time. Do we have an ethical obligation to make a space landfill? Right? Do you need to, ship it all to the moon or something, right? Maybe. And this article talks about it. It's interesting. So I want you to take a look at that. Read it. It'll be in the homework. There's some final sort of like tangential bioethical comments about aliens I want to make, and this is basically the last one. Could an alien be Catholic? Cover your cough. And that was a sneeze. Could an alien be Catholic? Could we show up to an alien planet and find that they are Catholic already? Is it possible? Well, if God is real, and philosophy seems to indicate yes, sure could happen. Could an alien be baptized? What is it? What do you have to do to be baptized? Because you can't baptize your dog; it doesn't do anything. You can't baptize an earthworm; it doesn't do anything. You have to be a rational being to be baptized. So if they're a rational being, could they be baptized? Seemingly, right? What does it take to be a rational being? What does that mean? Could you baptize an alien even if they're not human? Even if they're rational beings? Even if they're like persons? Even if they seem to have a soul? Like Jesus died and started the church, but Jesus was a man. He was a human, right? Does he just intend for salvation to only be for people, for humans? Or is it possible that, any sort of rational being would qualify? Would it be ethical to send missionaries to the aliens? Right? Is it ethical to send religious missionaries to a new nation? Well, seemingly, right? Was it ethical for, say, Europe to send missionaries to India? Well, yeah, as long as you're not forcing anyone to convert, what's wrong with it, right? Europeans send missionaries down to India who teach the people of India about Jesus and try and convince them. Well, I mean, it's just teachers trying to convince you of something. As long as you're not converting people at sword point or lying to them or saying, well, we're missionaries and we're going to bring you modern technology, but only if you become Catholic, those sort of things, which would have ethical conundrums. If you're just talking to people and saying, hey, man, this is what we believe and here's the logic for why we believe it, seems ethical. It's just a conversation. So is that any different towards intelligent aliens? Would it be ethical to send missionaries? And the final question is, who's the Bishop of Space? It's the Bishop of Orlando. That's a fact. The Bishop of Orlando is the Bishop of the Moon and all in space, of all of space. Because a bishop is determined, okay, when the ships came over to the New World, who was the Bishop of North America? It's the bishop of wherever the ships leave port. So if you left port in, say, in the Diocese of London, England, that's where the port was, and you show up and you discover the New World. Well, the New World then is part of the Diocese of London, England, and that bishop's in control. Well, where did the ships to space leave from? To the moon, for example, Orlando, Florida. So the Bishop of Orlando is the Bishop of the Moon. Fun fact. And with that, we shall conclude our general instruction in bioethics. If you remember nothing else, remember that the Bishop of the Moon is the Bishop of Orlando, Florida. See you next week for some wrap-up stuff. Good luck graduating and all that.